This is going to tie in beautifully. This is from Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear. You do not need anybody's permission to live a creative life. Maybe you didn't receive this message when you were growing up. Maybe your parents were terrified of risk. Maybe your parents were obsessive compulsive, afraid of what the neighbors would say. Maybe they weren't makers. Forget about it. It doesn't matter. And you can look back in your history and you will find somebody, because somewhere you will find people who spent their lives making things. Mm-hmm. It might have been a great-great-great-great-grandmother. Could have been farm, woodwork, something. And that's where you, me, where we all come from. It's human beings have been creative beings for a really long time, long enough and consistently enough that it appears to be a totally natural impulse. So, speaking to children again, that they're a little more in touch with that. I think they still have struggles because they aren't necessarily surrounded by makers like many generations ago they would have been. But it's still something, they're closer to that intuitive spirit of creativity. So let's talk about who in your lives when you were young that you saw as makers or creators, whether it was in your immediate family or a teacher or a grandparent, or you saw something somewhere and you said, oh my God, I want to do that. Joan?
Definitely my mother.
Okay.
Was a sewer because her mother had been a dressmaker, had made all of the family's clothes because they had to in those days. Mm-hmm. My mother grew up in the Depression. You made do with what you had, with hand-me-downs. You altered clothes. You fixed them until they couldn't be fixed anymore, and then they became rags for cleaning. And I was sewing my own clothes when I was in grade 9. I would show up on Civvies Day, because we had a uniform where you got 1 day a month to get your uniform cleaned. I would show up with a new outfit every month that I made. I had no idea that I was expressing myself or being creative when I chose the fabrics and the patterns and put them together. I think I was in my 30s before somebody said, oh, you're so creative. And I said, oh, really? Because to me it was normal. Mm-hmm. And my mom also refinished furniture. She did house painting and wallpapering and all that kind of thing. She provided me with crayons and colored pencils and all sorts of art things to do. I mean, the pipe cleaners with the egg carton and all that, she did that. We didn't have junior kindergarten or senior kindergarten. You went to school when you were 6 at grade 1. But she provided that for me. It was there. It was available. She sent me to a lino cut class once at the Y, and I must have been maybe 9 or 10, and I got in, and the lady said to me, now make sure you don't cut yourself with this. It's very sharp. And of course, I cut myself immediately, and I was too embarrassed to tell anybody, so I just walked home, and that was that. I didn't do another lino cut class until I was teaching it. And then my kids were doing amazing stuff that I was really surprised that they could do, and I've done more of it. But mostly sewing.
Yeah.
For me, a little bit of a dabbling with paint by numbers. I was given paint by numbers set. I decided to do a painting once with my sister's oils because she was taking fine art at U of T. Just a class, not the whole curriculum. And I thought I was doing the roche percée. My mother was very kind, and she said, well, okay, if that's what it is, dear, but it looks more like chocolate pudding in a sea of mint. But then that's because I had no training at all, no idea of shading or perspective or anything like that.
Right.
But I did it, and I had the opportunity to, and my oldest sister, in her fine art classes, she was so good, she could forge the masters. She did forge the European masters. But she also had 5 kids, so she didn't have time to do much.
Sure.
Until they grew up and left, and then she started doing acrylics because she couldn't stand oil anymore.
Right.
And she painted all through her retirement, family portraits, and she was also an example for me.
Right.
Yeah. And then, of course, I had music, too. I had my music teacher and glee club for 5 years, and I played the organ at church from the time I was 11 till the time I left for university. Mother Teresina, who was now known as Sister Emma Felice, was a Loretto nun at the convent. And the boardroom at the convent was the music room, where I, at 8 years old, walked up the hill by myself, had my music lesson, walked back home.
But you said none of these things occurred to you as creative?
No, I didn't know they were creative.
Right. And then you said when you were in your 30s, somebody said...
At the nursery school, I had organized a quilt making bee to make a fundraiser for the nursery school, and the teacher said, "Oh, you're so creative." And I thought, really? I had no idea that was... My grandmother must have known, because somebody told me that she had said that one. Lei speciale. She's special. But creative, and I didn't find that out until I was in my 40s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
How about you, Jay?
My influence is my mother.
Mm-hmm.
She was a wannabe actress, very interested in theater. My father inherited the business from his father. It was J.H. Wilson and Sons, and my dad was the son. And he didn't like doing what he had to do. He was a store manager. He didn't want me to do it. He wanted me to do whatever you want, but don't do this. You can never do this. But it's interesting because, again, I look at my father and I go, but he was extremely creative. He works with color. He works with design. He works, he goes into someone's home and says, well, these drapes with this carpet, with it, it's like, you're creative. What are you talking about? You're not creative. You're very creative. My stepbrother, Robert, was a designer with Eaton's and did the Eaton's home on Georgian Bay, their cottage home, designed their interior for that, like really amazing. So I have sort of the same thing about, you're not creative. My brother was the really creative one, and I was like kind of floundering around, kind of, what am I going to do? And then I just kind of followed in my mom's footsteps in terms of the theater and went, okay, I guess I like doing this. And I would get dragged to rehearsals when I was a little kid and, would sit there and things. And in fact, that's one of the stories that I have in the bio. And I'm going to share that with you because it's kind of fun. So I go to grade 3, I changed schools, and it's poetry day. And, or at least it's going to be poetry day. And the teacher says, so everybody come and bring like a poem or something you'd like to do or some kind of entertainment that you'd like to do. Oh, well, I'm ready. And it's a new school, so I want to make an impression.
Where is this?
This is in Guelph. So I moved from a large school, central school, to a 2-room schoolhouse. So I'm in a classroom with grades 1 to 4. Mm-hmm. I'm in grade 3. Mm-hmm. It's going to be poetry day next week. I know what I'm going to do because I've been going to rehearsal. My mom, and they've been rehearsing a show, and it's a New York show. And my father used to steal these little tidbits before copyright days. And they are doing a little skit about beatnik poetry. And I'm going, and every time it gets a really good laugh, but I have no idea really what they're saying. Like, I don't get the joke, but the audience is always bursting out laughing in rehearsal. So I'm going, oh, this must be great. So I commit it to memory. And so it's poetry day. Yes, James, the most enthusiastic I've ever been. I've been awful at math, awful at this. I changed schools. I feel really out of place. But poetry day, here we go. So I put up my hand. Yes, Jay, all right. I see you have a poem. Why don't you get up and say your poem? So I get up. Well, you know what you are? You're all crummy bastards. That's what you are. You're crummy And of course, it's beatnik poetry, and it's this joke thing. Well, of course, immediately the teacher grabs a hold of me, takes me down to the head office, phones my mom, and I'm taken out of school for the day. I think a couple of kids started crying, But that was when I realized, in an odd way, wow, you really do get people's attention. And I think I was craving it, right? Like I wanted to and I suddenly went, wow. Of course, I mellowed a little bit since then. It's not quite the same, but it was quite an experience. And I also realized how fortunate I was because my parents were taking me to these things that were very edgy long before that was allowed, really. Mm-hmm. And my father, I know, was really nervous because he worked in a small town. He knows a lot of people. Everybody knows him. but he's married to Betty Wilson, who's that theater person. She's a bit odd. And I think secretly my dad liked it. But he couldn't do that. He wasn't allowed to be creative or expressive or express his emotions or his feelings. He had to stuff it all inside. And so it's interesting when I look at that relationship that they had, she was the one who could express all the fact that he didn't want to be a store manager. And she could be crazy. And so it was really interesting to see how that played itself out. Yeah.
Wow.
I don't think I answered your question, but
Well, no, you did. You answered the question about where your inspiration
Where it
came
comes
from,
from.
for sure. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
But then, so that doesn't sound like an encouraging event in grade 3, and yet somehow you still pursued
in an odd way, though,
acting.
it was.
Okay.
Because, when you go back, everybody, oh, you're the guy who did it. And so I sort of became a celebrity and a hero.
Okay.
And, that's the weird thing about creativity in the performing arts. Different than creativity where, I remember the first time I met Joan, and she said, well, yeah, I'm creative, but I make things that are utilitarian. And I went, how interesting, because I create stuff that has no purpose whatsoever. That's not true. But
Right.
at the time,
But yeah,
it's
you
sort of,
like, how practical is this?
yeah, how
What's
practical
the-
is this? Now, again, when I mentioned in the bio the fact that, actually we use the power of oratory to convince you to give. And so, it is
Yes.
a gift in a way, in a
And
different way.
practical,
It's
yeah.
extremely practical. There's no material substance, but there is a positive thing that can happen. So there was that. But yeah, I was going to say the funny thing about being in performance, I'm glad I've never been really successful. I'm glad I've never had celebrity, because I think that that's a dangerous thing. Therefore, by the grace of God go I. I'm so glad that that didn't happen to me. I'm glad that I'm respected and yes, I love the attention, but I'm glad it never became celebrity, because I could see how destructive that could be. As I'm going back to, so I went back to school in grade 3, the kids are kind of, hey, you're that, wow, that's kind of, so I became a little bit of a celebrity, and I was accepted. And so it was a way of, finally, I'm part of the school. I'm part of the group.
Right.
Because I stepped outside. There were a lot of other kids who kind of wanted to do that too. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's fantastic.